सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट बात, सुबह
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان كرمي As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, fatty acids. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the catabolic reaction. The above catabolic reaction. O2 is utilized by the organism to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, and fatty acids, etc. Okay. To derive energy to perform various activities, carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reaction. It is therefore evident that O2 has to be continuously provided to cell and CO2 produced by the cell have to be released out. This process of exchange of O2 from atmosphere with CO2 produced by the cell is called breathing. The process of exchange of O2 from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hands on your chest. You can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that it is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following section of this chapter. Respiratory organs. Mechanism of breathing vary among different groups of animals, depending mainly on their habitats. And level of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelacanths, flatworm, etc. exchange O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion. Simple diffusion. Sponges, coelacanth, and flatworm exchange O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion. Sponges, coelacanths, flatworm exchange O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworm use their earthworm Earthworm use moist cuticles. And insects have a network of tracheal tube. Insects have network of tube called tracheal tubes, okay, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Earthworm, moist cuticle, insect tracheal system or tracheal tube. Sponges, coelacanths, flatworm. Simple diffusion. Special vascularized structures called gills. Bronchial respiration. Special vascularized structure called gills are used by most of the aquatic arthropods. Gills, aquatic arthropods, and mollusks where vascularized bags called lungs, pulmonary respiration. Mollusk, whereas vascularized bags called lungs. Mollusk, whereas vascularized bags called lungs, pulmonary respiration are used by the terrestrial form. Special vascularized structure called gills. Bronchial respiration are used by most of the aquatic arthropods. Mollusk, whereas a vascularized bag called lungs. Vascularized bag called lungs. Pulmonary respiration are used by the terrestrial of forms for the exchange of gases. Okay, gills for aquatic arthropods and mollusks. Gills. Vascularized bag lungs for terrestrial animals. Among vertebrates, fishes use gill. Among vertebrates, fishes use vertebrates. Okay, Fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians, like frogs, can respire through their moist skin. Cutaneous respiration. Frog. Cutaneous respiration, it is known as cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous respiration. मैं ना ये चैट ऑफ कर दे रही हूँ कि मैं ब्रेक टाइम में ना खोल दूंगी. 55 मिनट पढ़ेंगे, उसके बाद मैं चैट्स ओपन कर दूंगी. अभी के लिए ये कर देती हूँ. कर दिया. Sponges, coelenterates, flatworms, etc. for exchange of O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion over the entire body surface. Simple diffusion over the entire body surface. Earthworm use the moist cuticle, and insects have a network of tubes, tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Special vascularized structure called gills. Bronchial respiration are used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas the vascularized bags called lungs, pulmonary respiration, are used by the terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, and birds and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians, like frog, can respire through their moist skin. Cutaneous respiration. Amphibians, like frogs, can respire through their moist skin. Cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous respiration. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostril opening out above the upper lips. Human respiratory system. Pair of external nostrils. Opening out above the upper lips. It lead to nasal chamber through the nasal passage. Nasal passage and nasal chamber. Pair of external nostrils, then nasal passage, then nasal chamber. The nasal chamber is opens into pharynx. Nasal chamber opens into pharynx, a portion of which is common passage for food and air. Okay, nostrils, then we have nasal passage, then nasal chamber, and then pharynx. Nasal passage and nasal chamber, and then pharynx, a portion of which is common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region. Into the trachea. Pharynx, then larynx. Opens to the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. Larynx a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production. Okay. And hence is called sound box. Okay. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis. The glottis covered by epiglottis during swallowing. Glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. prevent food into the entry of food into larynx. Entry of food into larynx. To prevent entry of food into larynx during swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic. It is thin, okay, not thick, it is thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a Trachea is a straight tube extending up to mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into right and left primary bronchi. Fifth thoracic, okay. Straight tube. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity. Extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. During swallowing, glottis, okay, trachea is a straight tube extending up to mid-thoracic cavity. Straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra. Into right and left bronchi. Right and left bronchi. Fifth thoracic vertebra. Okay, mid-thoracic cavity. Fifth thoracic vertebra ma के भन्छ दुईटा मा प्राइमेरी ब्रोंकाई दुईटा ब्रान्च हुन्छ, ब्रान्च निस्किन्छ जसलाई के भन्छ प्राइमेरी ब्रोंकाई भन्छ, लेफ्ट र राइट. Each bronchi undergoes repeated division to form secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles ending up in a very thin terminal bronchioles. Okay. Each bronchi undergoes a repeated division to form secondary and tertiary bronchi. Primary bronchi undergoes a repeated division to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. Very thin, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. Primary bronchi, then secondary and tertiary is it bronchi? Yeah. Then finally bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles. Primary and tertiary bronchi. Initial bronchioles are supported by okay, trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous C-shaped ring. Okay, supported by incomplete cartilaginous ring. Each terminal bronchioles give rise to number of very thin, irregular Each terminal bronchiole give rise to number of very thin, irregular, walled and vascularized bag-like structure called alveoli. The trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous ring. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous ring. Each terminal bronchiole gives rise to number of very thin irregular, I swear to God. Each bronchi undergoes repeated division to form secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous ring. Each terminal bronchiole gives rise to number of very thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag structure called alveoli. It's okay. Each terminal bronchioles give rise to terminal bronchioles give rise to number of very thin irregular walled vascularized bag like structure vascularized bag like structure called alveoli. Give rise to number of very thin irregular walled and vascularized bag like structure called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprises the lungs. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprises the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double layered pleura. We have two lungs which are two lungs. We have two lungs covered by double layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining. Whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lungs surface. Thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchi constitute the conducting part, whereas alveoli and the ducts from the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. The conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air to the body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the rib, and on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of thoracic cavity will reflect in the lungs pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing, as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps: breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and CO2-rich alveolar air is released out. Diffusion of gases O2 and CO2 across alveolar membrane, transport of gases by the blood, diffusion of O2 and CO2 between blood and tissue, utilization of O2 by the cell for catabolic reaction and resultant release of CO2, cellular respiration as dealt in chapter 12.